So, what if the very foundations of faith weren't divine at all? What if something like the Bible was actually, in the words of one Nobel Prize winner, a catalog of cruelty? It's a pretty provocative thought, right? Well, that's the argument from author José Saramago. And today we're going to dive into his fierce critique of religion using an academic analysis by Omar Farooq Erdem as our guide.
I mean, wow. Saramago definitely didn't pull any punches. This quote really gets to the core of his argument. For him, the Bible wasn't a sacred text. It was a deeply, deeply flawed human document. So you have to ask, how in the world did he get to a conclusion like that? Let's unpack it.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going to get to know the man himself, José Saramago. Then, we'll dig into his ideas on where religion actually comes from, how he believed it's used to control people, and the damage he thought it caused. And finally, we'll flip the script and see how his own arguments hold up under a critical lens.
Okay, first things first. To really get the critique, you got to get the critic. So just who was José Saramago?
You know, his whole life was basically a story of fighting against the odds. He came from a poor family in rural Portugal, became a devoted communist, and eventually rose to become this literary giant, winning the Nobel Prize. But his honesty really cost him. One of his books was so controversial that his own government censored it, and he actually had to leave the country. Kind of ironic, right? The guy who questioned everything was eventually silenced by the very powers he criticized.
So when you look at his background, it all starts to make sense. He was an outspoken atheist and communist who grew up under a dictatorship. It's no wonder he was so suspicious of any powerful institution, whether it was political, corporate, or, religious. His novels were really his laboratory for taking these big ideas apart.
Okay, so let's get to the heart of his argument. For Saramago, religion didn't just appear out of thin air. No, he believed it grew from something much closer to home, from inside us.
This is the absolute core of it. For Saramago, the whole grand story, God, angels, heaven, hell, all of it wasn't a message from on high. He saw it as a human construction, something we built in our own minds to shield ourselves from a reality that can be, pretty scary.
He pretty much saw it as a three-step process. Step one, we're all just fundamentally fragile beings, right? We're scared of the unknown, we're anxious. Step two, to deal with all that fear, we invent religion. It's like a spiritual painkiller. And then, step three, a whole class of people, the clergy, emerges to control the supply of that painkiller, and they gain a ton of power and influence from it.
Now, this is where Saramago's view gets really interesting and kind of bleak. A lot of atheists thought, science and reason will eventually win out. But not Saramago. He thought religion was here to stay. And why? Because the things that make us religious, our fears, our hopes, our need for answers, are just part of being human. As long as we're human, he argued, we'll always be reaching for that comfort.
Okay, so if religion is a human invention born from our fears, what happens when it gets organized? This is where his critique gets really sharp. I mean, just think about that phrase for a second. God's salesman. He didn't see clergy as spiritual guides. He saw them as master marketers, selling a product called salvation. And their target audience? A population that's already vulnerable, already grappling with life's biggest and scariest questions.
And this slide just lays out the hypocrisy he was always pointing to. On the one hand, you have the ideal, the simple, humble life of Jesus. And on the other, you have what he saw as the reality of the institution, luxury, hypocrisy, and power. The contrast is pretty stark.
To Saramago, these weren't sacred mysteries. They were tools, sophisticated tools of control. He saw things like miracles and relics as ways to bypass logic and just inspire awe. Confession, a way for the church to know your deepest secrets. And things like baptism and excommunication were all about controlling who's in the group and who's out, right from the very beginning.
And according to Saramago, a system like this, built on control, doesn't just create believers, it creates enemies.
Now this is probably his most radical claim. He truly believed that religion is the #1 source of division in human history. Why? Because when you create a belief system that claims to have the one and only absolute truth, you automatically create an other, someone who is wrong, someone who needs to be converted or worse. For him, this wasn't just some abstract idea. He drew a direct line from things like the Crusades and the Inquisition straight to the religious conflicts we still see today. In his mind, all that violence wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature, the inevitable result of a worldview built on exclusion and absolute certainty.
Okay, Saramago's argument is powerful, there's no doubt about it. But is it the full picture?
Now, let's turn to the academic analysis and put his ideas to the test.
This is such a great point. It basically flips Saramago's own logic upside down. Okay, so fear and hope might lead someone to religion, but couldn't things like pride or arrogance, not wanting to submit to a higher power, lead someone else to reject religion? It suggests that both belief and disbelief can be rooted in our messy human emotions, not just pure reason.
The analysis offers a really fascinating alternative. What if Saramago was blaming the wrong thing? Maybe religion isn't the source of our conflicts, but just the uniform our natural tribalism likes to wear. Maybe the real problem is deeper, a basic human instinct to divide the world into us and them. Religion just gives us a convenient excuse. And this brings up a classic question, right? Do you judge an entire philosophy by its worst followers? The analysis here suggests that maybe you can't, that there's a real difference between the ideals of a faith and the very flawed people who try and often fail to live up to them.
All right, so let's wrap this up. On one side, you have Saramago's powerful case. Religion is a human invention used by institutions to control people, and it's the root of so much conflict. But on the other side, you have this compelling counterargument. Maybe he confused the weapon, religion, for the person wielding it, which is our own tribal human nature.
And that kind of leaves us with this one big final question to think about. If religion vanished overnight, would our problems vanish with it? Or is Saramago's critique missing the point? Would we just find new flags, new ideologies, and new reasons to fight the same old battles?